Thrand here, and I'm here with my Linden skilder, as it would be called in the Viking sagas, and my Lind, as it would be called in the Anglo-Saxon rune poems. And the whole thing about it is made out of linden wood, or some people know it as lime wood historically, also modernly known as bass or tila. And it is made of planking. It's glued together with real casein or cheese glue made by hand. It's covered with rawhide, about 1 millimeter thick of cowhide, back and front, and rimmed with it and stitched properly. Everything is a laminate glue construction with a nice oak handle, and it has the forged nails clenched in, and a handmade boss done by hand, myself, and put on it. Plus it's been done with period inks, and you have a beautiful design on it. And today, I think we have a very unique video that's never been seen before. No one has shown in depth how to build a completely historically accurate Viking shield. This could also be the same as some of the early migrational shields, all the way on into the 12th century and so on, with the parchment covered shields that were actually leather. That's what normally parchment was fine, thinner leathers, rawhides. But today we're going to build this shield, and it has a beautiful design on it that looks very historically accurate. It looks a lot like the shields that we find in the graves, where you see the painted imagery on it, the type of designs they would have instead of some prototype thing, you know, a Gishhalmer style thing that a lot of people do nowadays. It looks more like a historically accurate shield design. And amazingly, where I got this shield design from was this beautiful ring here from VKNG Jewelry. They were also very nice and sponsored the episode, the shield build, and the test video that will be coming afterwards, much like we did with the Gokstad shield. Shields like this are very expensive to make. We built this one and tested it, although there is no build video. This will be the build video for this shield here and this shield, because the same techniques will work to build either. If you want to do a Gokstad replica, the Gokstad ship replica, or you want to build this shield here, this video will cover it all. But this beautiful ring is from the Elite series from VKNG, and it's called the Odin ring. It's a pure silver ring. And what I did is I looked at it immediately when I looked online, because they told me, would you be interested in our jewelry? I said, sure, I'll go by and check it out, because of course what Viking doesn't love silver. Silver is the thing next to gold, right? So I went and looked at it, and when I saw this ring, I saw a shield. First thing I saw is it said, Hail Odin, and the runes are around it, and the shape and the design, and it looked like a center boss in the center. The first thing I thought of was the Door of Odin. One of the Kinnings in the old sagas was calling the shield the Door of Odin. The way it was used, and that it opened the door between life and death and into Valhalla. So you can see why that's a perfect Kinning. And plus, if you look at Theophilus's information, he describes doors and stuff that were used, made in a very similar way, covered with hides, so as well as shields. So I thought the first thing is this would make the perfect image. So I told them I would be interested if they were interested in sponsoring a shield build video that I've been planning to make, because I've been wanting to make an updated version for a very long time. The last time I did one, I covered it in cloth. Is that totally unhistorical? No. Even Theophilus talks about if you have nothing else, you can use some clean cloth, some kind of heavy, coarse, clean cloth, and just cover a shield with it. But it tightly woven clean cloth. The problem is, it's not as durable as hides, and we have really good rawhide here, and we've done this beautiful image from the ring, and they were gracious enough to send me the ring, and they have a beautiful catalog full of all kinds of things, but they honestly said, if you watch this video when it airs, and you click the link down below and you're interested in the Odin ring, the Elite Series ring, they will give you 30% off the ring for the next 48 hours. If you're not interested in this ring per se, but some of the other fine bronze jewelry or silver, which you can look through their catalog, and you probably should to thank them for sponsoring this awesome video, you can get 20% off of anything in the catalog for the next, 15 days. For the next 15 days from when the video airs. So I think that's more than a gracious offer, and I think that them sponsoring this video and the test video was a very good thing, so I can finally get this out, and I think it's something that a lot of people have been waiting to see. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video and show you how it's done. I'd like to outline the materials you'll need to build a shield. You'll need some kind of shield boards. Lots of different types of boards will work. Anything from, I've made everything from white pine. The Vikings use fir, spruce, anything like a pine. The linden wood, of course, that's going to be the big highlight of this shield build, is testing out the linden wood. You can get the shield planks. I like buying them commercially and just getting some planks that fit together well, they're the right size, and you can cut your disc out. You will need your glue. I'm going to teach you how to make the glue in the video if you want to make your own homemade casein or cheese glue, like the Vikings would have used, most likely, which we believe is the proper glue. I will also help you cut out your rawhide, which you will need rawhide for the material to cover the shield in. I would say anything like cowhide, horse is supposed to be extremely good. I have not tested it yet, but from my research, I believe it's one of the best. You'll need some kind of rivets or nails to put the shield together with. You'll need wood for the handle, of course, too, not just the shield boards. You'll need some kind of stitching if you are stitching pieces together like we are, or actually something. You can either use rawhide lacing, some kind of stitching to stitch the rimming on with. But one of the first things you'll need, which normally about 5 inches covers the hole, you'll need an umbo or center boss. I'm going to show you a basic outline on how to cut a disc out and use a dishing stump and hammer your own out. If you would like, you could get mass-produced ones where an armory mass produces them. Something like Medieval Shop has really good center bosses, and 12 gauge up there near the 8 to 10 gauge center bosses like the Vikings use. They use very thick bosses. They were iron. I guess they were trying to make dang sure they didn't get their hand damaged behind it. But you can also get a professional armorer to make one specifically for you if you want to deal with somebody like that. This is going to be kind of crude. I'm not going to finish it out too much. It's going to look hammered out. It will fit the shield like I want it. I'll be drilling holes in it. This one's almost done here, but we're just going to outline the steps real quick on that. I believe I covered all the materials, didn't I? The glue, the leather, the wood, some kind of nails or rivets, like forged nails or rivets, the center boss, and stuff to lace with, stuff for stitching if you need it. Especially for the rimming, you will need a way to put the rimming on. The center of the ring design looks very much like a center boss on a shield, an umbo. And what we're going to do today is make an umbo to go on the shield we're creating. Most historical center boss or umbo during the Viking Age were made out of wrought iron or bog iron. Some people call it bloomery iron. Not steel. This is good steel, modern steel. Would be about 8 to 10 gauge thick. Today I'm going to be using 16 gauge steel, but really high quality. Now if I was going to try to stop a really heavy warbow with armor piercing points, or I would say maybe a thrown spear with an exceptionally good point on it, this might not be quite enough. I mean, it should stop it from hitting my hand if it's domed properly, but I would recommend a little thicker if you want to use a thicker gauge. I'm just going with this one. It'll be easier for me to hammer out, easier for me to cut and work with. And it's what I had available. That's why we're using this. We could use, like I said, you could use a 12 gauge, 14 gauge, anything you can cut, but I'm going to be using a jigsaw, and I believe it would be hard to go up in a higher gauge with a jigsaw. You might have to use another cutting method, but you have to get the disc cut out. The dishing is something different. It'll take more or less time depending on how thick the steel is, the gauge. We're going to use a bowl because it's about the right size of what I need, and draw as close as we can to the edge here so we don't have to cut too much metal. And I'm going to go with the outside line with my marker. And if you see or if you notice, it's right at the edge of the metal, so I should be able to cut this out quite easily so we can start on our center boss. I will be following the outside line that I drew with the marker because that just happens to be what I need. I need it that size, right to the edge of the steel that I have here. I have clamped it down to the sawhorse with my C-clamps. You could put your foot on it, but I mean, you can risk cutting your foot. I've done that a lot. I figured I would do it properly for everybody, and I am wearing some protective glasses. I recommend that. So a disclaimer, be very careful if you do any of this stuff yourself. It can be dangerous, especially working with metal. You can get metal in your eye. You can get cut, hit with a hammer or something. So be very careful. Now we should be able to clean this up quite well with probably a heavy grade sandpaper. I'll go around the outside so it's not sharp and doesn't cut me while I'm actually working with it. And that way it won't be that way on your shield either, hopefully. The next step of making our umbo is to dish it out. And I'm using a stump, yes, very Viking age, a stump as a tool to hammer on. Some people might have metal forms, you know, like have a shape of the center boss and hammer it into that. I've seen people do that with a steel one, but we're using wood, so this wood can move. It can change shape as I beat. I can hit it and change the shape of it. So basically what I've done is got a good hard piece of wood originally, it's kind of old now, but hammered out the shape in it. I heated it up and burned it a little bit and then beat a shape in it. What I'll be doing today is I'm going to be starting from the center and hitting it and working in a spiral pattern, but we don't want to go too far. I'm not going to mark it off. I'm just going to go about where I think's right. You can mark it if you like. You know how much your rim is, but I know my rim's going to be about yay so much, just big enough for my hand, and the rest is going to be the rim. When we're done beating out the dome, we can reshape the dome by putting it over something. If you have a trailer ball hitch or a ball shape, steel ball shape, you can help get all the little dents out. I may leave them in there to look aesthetically like it's hand hammered from back in the day and just smooth some of them out. But also you can flatten the edge out if it domes as well, or flange it out if you dome the whole thing and finish it out. But today I'll show you how I start on it. I'm probably not going to show the whole process, but just show how I start on making an umbo or center boss. At first we won't need pliers. Later I may use a C-clamp or some pliers to hold on the edge. If you use vice grips, be sure and use some cardboard or something in between, because if you scar this edge up really bad from hitting it, holding it with pliers that are serrated like modern pliers instead of tongs, it's really hard to buff that out or to shape that out. After you're done doing it, yes, you can go over it with any kind of polishers, any kind of brushes, anything that you would like, or sand it down some if you've actually marred the edge some, but that will cause really bad scarring that's hard to remove, and you don't want that modern look on an old center boss. Now most people would use tongs for this, but I've been using things and just holding it down on my dishing stump. And notice I don't bring my hammer way up so I hit my hand. It doesn't take that much. I got a pretty heavy ball peen. And I've just been hammering, not in the same spot, but you'll see where you've hit dents in it, and you're smoothing it out by hitting the places in between. That's what you want to aim for. This is pretty close to being done. I've basically finished it. I think that you can get something out pretty nice that you can use on a shield if you want to hammer your own out. And basically this is the one we're going to be using on the shield here. One of the interesting things about this project, everyone's asked me, how do you make the cheese glue or the Casein glue? And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to show the recipe that I use. And first let's start off with the ingredients. And I'd like to say that the shield based on this ring is awesome. I think it's going to be really, really good. I went out of my way to make it extremely strong. I was more concerned with that even than just making it look good. So anyway, let's go ahead and start with this. We have the fat-free milk, which is actually just a new marketing method for I mean, they say fat-free, but it's basically skim milk. So you can use any skim milk if it says skim milk. Fat-free milk, you don't want fat in the milk. This will weaken the glue, make it more rubbery, and take a lot longer to dry. It doesn't make very good glue. So if you want to use powdered milk that's fat-free and reconstitute it, that'll work. If you use fresh milk off the farm that's unhomogenized and unpasteurized, you can let it separate, the cream come to the top to use for something else, and you can take the skim milk from the bottom, the very bottom skim milk, and it'll work great. I mean, that's what our ancestors would have done if they were using milk. Most of the recipes historically are called cheese glues because they used leftover cheese. The problem with Theophilus' method of using cheese, or the one that Cennini, the 15th century recipe, they use lime just like I'm going to be using. The curds I'm making are from the milk, but they use leftover cheese. You have to wash the cheese. You have to use a low-fat cheese to get a good strong glue, and the process becomes very time-consuming and not efficient moderately. You only get approximately maybe a third of the yield, and you would have to buy some expensive low-fat cheese. Most likely no one's going to give you a little throwaway cheese to work with, unless you're lucky to have something like that. So I recommend using this recipe, and it's very effective and very efficient. So we got the glue. We're going to need some way to separate it. Now you could let this set out and curdle on its own, but the best way to do it is use vinegar, 5% vinegar, and white vinegar, so there's no impurities or anything in it, and that's what we're going to use. We have measuring tools for that here, measuring cup for the milk, and then after you curdle your milk, we're going to need a strainer. So you need something to strain with. It can be a large coffee filter like this in a colander, or you can line your colander or your sieve with cheesecloth. The problem with cheesecloth, it's usually expensive. You can wash it and reuse it if it doesn't get messed up too bad, but you have to line it with quite a bit to make sure you don't lose the small curds. Something like this, you'll wind up with every little piece, so you'll be a little more efficient on your curds. Then you're going to need a bowl to mix it in when you put your hydrated lime, which is I'm using hydrated lime. You can use pickling lime. This is calcium hydroxide. The reason why you don't want to use quicklime like calcium oxide, it's a lot more caustic and dangerous. This lime works really good here. I have no problem with it. Pickling lime is supposed to be ground a little bit finer, so you won't get sometimes you get some little stony pieces in there, but this one dries really fast, like super glue from what we're saying. I mean, it's like fast. I mean, I shouldn't say that fast, but it's drying really, really fast. You have to keep adding water if you want to work with it or use it as a paint like we did. If you do not have the lime or don't want to work with it because lime is a little more dangerous and can hurt your eye, you can use baking soda. It's not as strong a glue and it takes longer to dry from what I understand. It'll be the exact same recipe, substitute one for one. But anyway, let's get started. This 2-foot round shield, we're going to be using 1,000 milliliters in metric, because the recipe for every 100 milliliters, it calls for 1 tablespoon of vinegar to curdle it. You can warm it up, but no more than 40 degrees Celsius. What is that, about 104 degrees, something like that? Don't go over 100 degrees. You shouldn't have to go over 100 degrees. I wouldn't even go up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit unless you have to. So anyway, we've got 500 milliliters here, and we need to use 10 tablespoons of vinegar, the 5%, and we're going to use the measuring cup to do 1,000 milliliters. It says 500, and that should be 10 tablespoons. So each 100 milliliters is 1 tablespoon of vinegar. Try to get it as right on as you can. Don't apply any heat until you've got your vinegar in, because it may start separating immediately right away, which would be awesome. Then you wouldn't have to worry about even heating it. The lower you can keep the temperature and curdle it if you have the time just to sit there and wait. You could do that as well and get the best glue possible, because then you don't accidentally heat your proteins and damage them in any way. But I'm going to need 10 tablespoons. 1, 2, 9, 10. That should be all we need on the vinegar. And apply heat, but very low. I'll put my thermometer in. Yeah, I didn't bring that up, but if you have a candy thermometer or a cooking thermometer, it's okay to put it in there. That way you know what temperature it is and you don't accidentally heat it over about 104 degrees, 105 degrees. I think it's like 40 degrees Celsius. And you'll see as it starts trying to curdle. I didn't even get quite up to 80 degrees, close at the very bottom, and it's already separated. You might want to let it set a few minutes and the curds to start sinking to the bottom. But you can see the whey separated from the curds and the whey's on top. Okay, you can use cheesecloth, like I said, if you want to line your colander or your sieve, whatever you're using. But in my opinion, I think that the coffee filters that are oversized, depending on the amount you're doing, or an oversized tea filter, whatever you can get a hold of, works just fine. What I do is I slowly pour it in to start off, kind of low so I don't rip the filter. And this is all whey off the top. If you notice, this is all whey coming off of this. No curds yet. They're at the bottom. That's good. I'm going to let most of that whey drain before I start putting the actual, otherwise the actual curds will start messing our filter up. But you can kind of pick it up, squeeze a little bit, get it out. Good thing about this recipe, it doesn't waste much. It's not like using old cheese, but I guess if you had old no good cheese, it wouldn't really matter if you wasted much of it. You could save the whey if you wanted and use it for something if you need whey, but we don't need it. To speed it up a little bit, I'm going to just kind of sit here, be careful not to break my filter. Kind of mash and squeeze a little bit. And it'll look just like this. This is what your glue is, basically. This in your alkaline compound. I'm here with my horticultural hydrated lime, which means it's for gardens and so on, to make them more alkaline, to get rid of the acidity. And it works really good. Like I said, it's not ground as fine as I might like. Might try if I can find the right one, pickling lime for as strong as we can possibly get. What I'm doing now is just getting all the curds in here. Make sure we get them all, because we need all the glue we can get here. It takes almost all this just to glue one side on. Almost, not quite. But this is the material that's gluing the whole shield together. When I go to put the handle on and I put the nails through it, I'll use this glue when I rough up the outside of the rawhide because it doesn't stick as well there. I'll use it when I stitch the rimming on. This is a great glue. I mean, this is some of the strongest glue I've seen, especially using this here. Now what I'm going to need to do is put 10 teaspoons, and I don't try to push them down or anything, I'm just trying to level them off. 1 teaspoon, 2, 10. I'll put this out of the way here. You'll need water, and the cleanest water you can get, which would be like distilled water, would work great, because that way you know you're not adding anything else. City water a lot of times has chemicals and stuff in it, and I don't know how it would affect your glue. Plus, historical water would not have as many impurities in some ways, maybe bacteria, which is an enemy to this glue, but if you boiled it, it'd probably be a lot better than modern water. So it's all the glue fumes, I'm sure. No, don't breathe it, it's not good for you, especially when it's not wet or something. But look how it's turning into like a glue or paste instantly. You could tell when you've got about the right amount of hydrated lime, because all the curds will just dissolve into it. See what I'm saying? No water added or anything. And it's starting to turn into like a paste. If it's not too curdy, you don't need to add more lime, and I think I got the right amount. It's working just right. You just need to add water to get it the consistency you need. If it's too pasty, you need to add water. If it's too curdy, you might need to add more lime. Curds mean, they haven't actually dissolved into the mixture. As you can see, we got a nice white glue consistency. Might be a little clumpy, it's not gonna really hurt that bad. It shouldn't make any difference at all. And you can use this right away, or if you want to try to save it, you can try, but I don't recommend it. I recommend making small batches. If you just use the recipe, 100 milliliters of the milk, 1 tablespoon of 5% vinegar, curdle it, strain it, add 1 teaspoon of either your hydrated lime or your baking soda, and then mix it, dropping little bits of water in there until you get the right consistency. Recipe, but this turns out really hard, dries really well. And I hope you've enjoyed our little tutorial on making casein or cheese glue. You can use this for any project, especially shields. Like I said, this is going to be a complete video teaching you how to build your own historically accurate shield, just like the Goxted ship replica I have over here. This shield performed extremely well in other test videos, and it's covered in rawhide, which you can see is translucent. What I did in this one is I did not put any kind of design or paint or anything on it. I wanted to be able to see through the translucent rawhide and see the actual shield boards underneath it, which in this one I used 7 boards. Most historical Viking shields are 8 to 7 boards, which form one shield board. They're shield boards, I guess, until they go together and they're glued and butted together and clamped or cramped together, as Theophilus says. He says to use the cramp that's used by coopers and barrel makers to hold your boards together. Now, they don't have to be the exact same thickness like modern wood, but you would have to plane them or to make sure that they fit properly. What I've done here is I went and found a store that had basswood. I'm able to make a 2-foot shield with the planks that I found that would fit together and butt together properly with no light through them. You want to have them as proper as possible to butt up to each other and find some that will work. That's why I like to, instead of ordering them online, I'm sure I could get different basswood or linden wood online and maybe bigger pieces or broader pieces to use less planks and make a larger shield. But I wouldn't have been able to hand pick them. I hand picked them. Now what I've done here is I've cramped them or clamped them together, and I've glued them, and I've weighted them down. That is because when you clamp them in this fashion, even with the weight of the clamps on them, you can kind of cause them to curl up some, and we don't want that. We want it perfectly flat. So you see the weights here. I'm going to be removing these. And then I'll go through the step and process I had to go through to make sure it didn't stick to this floor. But what I do is after I've put the glue between each board, and not too much, you don't need a lot, but just a little bit along the actual board, as you can see, I press them together one by one, and after I get them all together laid on the ground, I try to make sure there's none on the bottom if I can, nothing underneath it. But even after I clamp it, because it squeezes more out, I will push it. And I'll move it far enough, because it should be fine like that, even if you have to put a lighter weight on the center while you're doing it. You should be able to move it around with the clamps on it and take a sponge and clean the floor under it. Now the reason you want to do this is you don't want to glue these shield boards down to the actual floor, even though this is an old cement floor, because you probably will never get it up properly without breaking it. And you want to make sure, once these clamps are off, which we're good here, this is loose. You can see I'm not going to have to worry about it. I did a good job moving it around and cleaning under it. You want to make sure if it is stuck down that you take the clamps off when you're done, and you want to push on the sides to knock it loose. And you want this to dry after you've glued it with your casein glue or cheese glue. You can use real casein or cheese glue, or I highly recommend Type 2 Type Bond glue. It works really good and is the closest thing to casein glue, being a modern synthetic version of a protein glue, just like cheese glue or casein glue. Now that we have the shield board put together, which is 8 planks of linden wood, we're going to mark it to cut the shield shape. And what I mean by cut the shield shape, this is a Viking Age shield with a center boss. So we're going to have to cut the hole for the center boss, and we're going to have to cut the outside before we actually plane it down. Or in this case, I will use a sander to make it easier for me to do, because I'm not used to using a proper plane and evening it out properly. I want to be able to get the same results our ancestors did, but easier, faster, and still get a historically accurate shield in the process. At least up to par with what they would have created. What I'm doing is I'm measuring it out here. It's 24 inches across, it's a square. There's 8 boards, so I can go right by the middle line where it's glued together, and I can mark it right at 12 inches. That's where I'm going to put my tack. And what I'm going to do is use a string method like they probably would have done back then if they were trying to do a perfect circle, and just draw around it with a string that doesn't stretch easily. So with a tack, you don't risk splitting anything, so that's the best thing to go with, because this would be very difficult to split if it's covered in proper rawhides. But until the rawhides are glued on each side, it's considered a fragile item, truly. So you get a proper circle. And usually I find about 5 inches is perfect for the center boss. The hand fits in there properly. Let's see what I've got here. Approximately 5 inches, so we should be good. We have our shield drawn off here that we're going to cut out, and all I need to do now is use the jigsaw. Use my jigsaw, and I'm going to be cutting the circle out, the outside of the shield. And we just want to be very careful not to split the boards. Now, it's, like I said, it's more likely to split with the grain than it is to split on the actual joints if you glued them properly with a good Casein glue or tight bond 2 or something like that. Now we have our shield cut out, and it's almost perfectly circular. And remember, if it's a hair off, historically that would be accurate. They were never exact. Not when you were working with hand tools and the measurements at hand. They try to get it as perfect as they could, but I mean, that makes it more authentic, pretty much. I have my hole drawn for the center boss here, and about 5 inches is okay. I am going to cut on the inside of the line this time because the hair smaller is okay. The only thing I'm going to do differently is I've noticed on some of like the Gokstad shields and some different historical shields, it wasn't perfectly round. There was a straight line at the top. So what I'm wondering is if I allow the leather to curl in, the rawhide, it's actually rawhide, or pad it somehow and have a straight line, if it would rest on the top of the hand better if you make one side the top. Now you can make it ambidextrous like I normally do, just make a round hole either way, but I'm thinking maybe there's some advantage to that in the use of the shield. So what I'm going to do is just use the yardstick to draw a line, and my hand should still fit in here fine, and cut it that way. We're going to see what happens. But I'm going to use the line of the board and just draw a line right there. I'm going to try cutting it out this way and following that. I'm going to drill a hole so the scrolling saw blade can fit through. Like I said, we're going inside slightly because we don't want it quite the full size. That should be good enough for our saw to actually work. Now we're going to do the same thing we did earlier, except we're going to insert the saw blade in the hole and start following that line. Now this hole isn't 100% perfect. It doesn't really matter. We've got it where my hand will fit in here, and like I said, it should help rest it on the hand. And I think that might give some advantage when using the shield if you have a top or a bottom. Maybe. We're going to find that out. It's just an experiment. If I want to change it, I can always cut this out and continue with the regular round hole that I normally use. It's usually, like I said, ambidextrous, but I can't see why you couldn't do that if you wanted to. Use the round part as the top and still have that as the bottom. Wouldn't make any difference. We now have our shape cut out, and it's time to actually do our hide first, because I suggest doing that before we actually plane it down or sand it down and shape it thinner towards the edge. We're going to do that first, so that way we can get our hide cut, and this is a lot less chance of breaking. It's going to be a lot easier to work with and not have a chance of pushing down on the leather and maybe cracking it or something with it not thinned out. Once it's thinned out, it's very fragile, and you've got to be careful with it before you actually cover it with the hide. We have our rawhide here, and this is cow rawhide. If you look closely, you can tell we've cut multiple discs out of this. We cut the disc out for the Gokstad shield here, which is the largest. It's a 36-inch shield, a beautiful shield. We did the one for Vegard Vike that he tested for us, and he deemed it indestructible. You might want to go by there and check that out. But this is cowhide. Actual horsehide, which I want to be experimenting with in the future, is supposed to be lighter and even more durable and stronger than the cowhide. That's why Theophilus, if you look, states horse, ass, or cow. He was stating in the order what's better. And he says if you don't have anything else, you can use cloth. And if you see one of my old videos where I did how to build a period Viking shield or a period shield, pretty much with modern materials, meaning stuff you can easily get a hold of, I covered it in linen. So you can cover it in a canvas type linen cloth. You can use multiple layers of thinner cloth like bed sheeting linen, whatever you like, and do the same thing we're doing. The only thing is rawhide is way better. That's what you want. You want rawhide. Now the rawhide we have here today had a crease in it, and what you want to do with that, if you have something like that, you want to cut this stuff while it's dry with snips is what I do. I use like aviational snips. And the reason why is it's going to shrink when you wet it. And you do wet it. He describes you wet the rawhide, and this would have hair on it. And you would wet it till you could get the hair off. After you remove the hair, then you would wring it out till it's somewhat dry, and then glue it on with the Casein glue or the cheese glue. But today what we're going to do is we've got this piece, and this is going to be an easy one. For the front, I can pretty much cut a perfect disc. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up on here, and I've bent that crease out. If it's rolled up one way, you can roll it reverse the other way to kind of straighten it out like you do a map or something. And that's basically what we're doing. We're just trying to straighten this out. We're trying to line this up the best we can. But the flaw on this one, we want to get what we think is our top and put it in the part we want to be our top. Haven't quite decided. I'm thinking this will be the top up here. But we want to line it up the best we can. And what I'm going to do is line it up like this here, where we have about a 1/4 inch missing here and here on the edges, because I'm going to put rimming around this entire shield. So when I stitch rimming on like I did here, and I will show you the diagram of how it's done, or we believe it was done off the Gok stitch ship, because some of them had holes in them, some of them didn't. A lot of the shields were mixed matched, the boards, so that's why you see a few holes and then some missing. They didn't get the planks back together properly because they were all apart and they were reassembled by the conservators. So they're not exact. But the ones that do have rimming, which we don't know, and the other ones why they don't have holes and some do have holes, so they had to be rimmed in some way or put together in some way. I think maybe the edges were just stitched together. This one we won't be able to do that. We're going to have to put a rimming on it, so let's go ahead and draw it. So what I'm going to be doing is drawing a circle right here as soon as I get it lined up right. Pressing down as hard as I can on the shield. Because we want to flatten out this leather without damaging the shield. That's why I did not want to thin the shield yet, because I want it to be more rigid and able to take the force of doing this without damaging the shield boards that we're using. But this material is more flexible than white pine, which normally they use, the Vikings normally used, most of the shields we find, other than the linden wood that they mention in the sagas, just like the Anglo-Saxon rune poems. White pine, spruce, and fir, all those woods will split much more easily than this one. I was experimenting and playing around with it. It flexes, it almost gives. I mean, like it's unbelievable instead of breaking on the grain. So this is going to actually make a really good shield from what I can tell. Can't wait to test it. Let's see what our disc looks like when I get done. Go around it one more time. And we should have it sketched right here. Just have to cut it out. It doesn't look too bad. It's almost a perfect circle. Just a hair missing here and here, which will be fine. Other than using linden wood, which is one of our experiments, and using the straight edge at the top, that we're going to deem the top for the hand. One of the things I'm doing here is I have a piece of rawhide that you can tell, even when it's flattened out, is not big enough for a 24-inch round. We had enough at one time because this was a large piece of leather that we got our 24 for Vegard Vike from, and we got our Gok stitch shield on the wall here from, the 2 discs. If you can do that and you have the leather for it, go right ahead. That's the best way to do it. Cut 2 perfect discs that overhang the edge just by a hair. Perfect, that's the way you want to do it. But we're going to be doing an experimental process, and we're going to make a pattern out of paper and figure out if we can use this scrap leather here to do the backing to the shield by stitching it together. And we do see different patterns on the shields, like spirals and quadrants, like them cut into quadrants. It could have been that. They might have not had enough leather, or used it from scrap leather, the shieldwright who made it, to cover the size shield that they wanted. So you can get different pieces out of the shape of leather if you, and use certain pieces that you want to use. It might be tougher, so on, lighter, to produce the disc that you want, because you're going to be missing the piece in the middle, which cuts some of the material down that you need just to get the pieces to cover it. And then you just need the quadrants or the spiral pattern that you're going to stitch together. So what we're going to do is make a paper pattern and then figure out if there's a way to get the pieces out of the scrap leather here. So we have one good disc that's good enough with our rimming, and then we're going to make the backing, which is going to be an experiment to see how strong it is, and stitch it together with sinew and then glue it on as well. So let's go ahead and get started with that. To cut out. Now let's see how our paper turned out. And what I decided to do, I originally thought of maybe thirds, which is a lot harder to get even. I decided to go with quadrants or quarters, because I will be able to use the leather that I have and cover the entire back properly. And then I will just have 4 areas to stitch together. And this is an experiment. We want to see how strong that is compared to normal, although the shield is going to be strong. I can already tell that, but due to the wood and the leather we're using is very, very tough. We're going to be stitching these areas and cutting it in these parts, and these are the pieces we'll be cutting out of the actual leather. I'll line this one up, and what I did is I folded the paper to get the proper positioning. Then I'm using a straight edge or a yardstick, and I've marked back and front. So if I cut these out exact with a straight edge, I should be able to stitch them together properly.
The leather should be levelled with an iron spoke shave, which is curved and has an edge on the inner side and 2 handles so that it can be used with both hands. With this, panels, doors and shelves are planed down until they are perfectly smooth.
That is exactly what Theophilus said. I hope you could hear that. Caddy was reading it for us. But this is my spoke shave today. I'm using a sander because I'm not adept with a spoke shave, and they do have modern ones. But it would take me a lot longer, and these boards are already quite level, but we want to finish it off, get the glue gone, and taper it just a little bit. This was a really thin shield board to start off with. We started off with 1/4 inch. The other shield I made, the one up here, was much thicker when I started, and I used a coarse sandpaper to get it all the way down to 5 millimeters in the center, which is a little bit thinner than this, believe it or not, and about 2 millimeters at the very edge to a fine edge at the very edge. So this is extremely strong made that way. But I don't think I will thin this as much as it is, so it might as well have a little more meat to it on the wood. But I am going to do both sides, and I'm going to kind of taper it towards the edge some. But like I said, I'm not going to take off a ton. But let's get started. The shield finished out. It is tapered thinner towards the edge. Lots of sawdust. It's still thicker in the center, which is good. But like I said, I don't want to take that much off. So I think we're good to go. And I might thin it a little bit more around the very edge to accept the rimming. But that's pretty much our shield board right here. And as you can see, I've gotten all the glue lines off where there's glue caked up and even it out where it's flat and smooth so it can accept the leather and the image that I want to put on it. I think that's going to be nice. This is our wonderful image made by Brad Lynn, our graphic artist here at Thrand YouTube channel. And he's the one who turned the ring, as you see here. And yeah, I can wear it on the other finger. I was just wearing it on this one to be out of the way. He did an excellent image. I'm thinking about using some blues and reds with it, as in the picture that I'm showing you. But if you look at this, what I'm going to do is I need to get this edged on the shield. And this looks very much like some of the historical stuff that we've found on shields that they believe were unfinished, and it was on the shield board itself. Well, my theory is they thought the shields were real thin like this and not covered with anything. My theory is that it actually shows through the translucent hide, and you would put it with either inks and dye it into the wood, kind of like a tattoo, what I'm going to do, and then use your Casein glue or cheese glue over it with the translucent hide, which you can see through all of it. Or you could paint it on there with Casein glue or Casein paint is what it would be with pigment in it, and then glue over that. Or you could just put some pigment in your paint if you just wanted a background color. If you just wanted it yellow or black or something like off the Goxted ship, you could just do that color in your actual Casein or cheese glue and it would show through, and then maybe paint something on top of the shield. Because yes, you can paint on top of the rawhide because it's basically parchment. They used that for years to as paper, scrolls, as a medium to paint on rawhides. So you can do that as well. But today we're going to put the whole image on the shield and dye it into the wood with calligraphy ink or India ink. And what I've got to do first is get this beautiful design on the shield so I can do that. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use charcoal, and I have paper here. I'm going to do the entire back of the paper in charcoal, kind of like if you take a pencil and rub the back of something and then draw over it to get it to transfer over, and I'm going to use it to transfer this image onto the shield. And you see we have a perfectly smooth shield surface here, and it should work pretty easily. We'll show you how that works out. Let's see what happens. Apologize. I meant to have this video out much sooner. The only problem is, if you notice there's blue tinting to the shield where I meant to paint it, is I had painted it already. The problem was it was up late at night and I had, I guess, some kind of food poisoning or something. I wasn't feeling well. I was sick for a day. And I got my proportions wrong on my actual Casein glue, which I am including that recipe in this video if I can. If there's not enough room in this video, because it's mostly focusing on the shield build of the Linden wood, which everything's put together with Casein glue, I will put it as a separate video, and I will also put links to the recipe, you know, the actual other video down below in the video, so you can easily find it. But we're going to redo it. It does look kind of warped. The wood's not damaged in any way. It just got really wet on the front side, and the glue was not adhering because I had put the hide on wet with the glue after I'd painted this and let it dry. But we're just having to start all over is what's happening. But it shouldn't make any difference. Our shield should turn out fine. I've got my curds and I've got my hydrated lime, calcium hydroxide, which is safer to work with than, let's say, calcium oxide or quicklime. It's very much a historical recipe. I will show you how to make that as well. So if you want to do period glues, you can. And period paints, which you pretty much have to if you want a glue that I can paint on here lightly and then still glue the hide on and have it connect to it. Because the synthetics, the modern glues, if I were to use glue to make a paint or any other kind of paint, it might not adhere the hide properly. I want it to be on there really, really good. So let's go ahead and start adding our water. We just want a little bit. And we're going to add dye as part of the liquid as well. And I'm using Indian ink as the dye, which is a blue color. I have the paint ready. I got the color blue that I wanted. And what I'm doing here is I'm painting it, and you should have a nice paint that feels like an acrylic or an oil paint, or not quite thick as an oil paint, but if it was thinned out properly. If you have it just right, it shouldn't run or anything. It should feel like a really good paint. The problem I warn you with is if you use the hydrated lime, it dries quickly. If you get it on your fingers, if you ever got any kind of good glue on your fingers, like I have a little on my fingers, you have to it dries quickly, and it kind of flakes off like I guess almost like a plastic or something. And after thinning the paint several times, because this glue dries extremely fast if you use the recipe I showed you to keep it the right consistency, we finally finished all the blue panels, the 4 panels. That makes the cross with the circle stand out extremely well. It says Odin, and then it says Hail underneath it, so Hail Odin. Yeah, that's what's on the Odin ring that I'm wearing right here. And I think it looks very much like the image. I may come back with some black paint and outline these. I'm thinking about it, and I may go back with the red paint, or the red dye, excuse me, the actual red Indian ink, and touch up these runes here and these after I outline them. But other than that, I think I'm pretty much done. We will be going into the gluing on of rawhide soon with just the plain glue. It is pretty much translucent too, just like the rawhide, so we should be able to see the image completely through, and I may touch it up on the outside afterwards, I don't know, on top of the rawhide. We're at the point to put the first piece of leather on. The front of the shield is going to be a solid disc. Hair short on the side just by a little bitty bit, but I'm going to be rimming the shield, so it shouldn't make that big a difference. I mean, ideally you'd want the leather to go all the way to the edge. But today what we're going to do is go ahead and use it this way. I'm going to cut it out, and all I've done is recheck my work to make sure that my line that I drew on with pencils there, and I also made sure this time this was totally pressed out. If there's creases or anything in your leather, you'll have to work with them because you want to cut this while it's dry. The reason why is when it totally dries out and you've glued it to the shield, it's going to shrink to this size. If you were to cut it wet and measure it then, of course it would be way too small for the shield disc. It would seem bigger than it is, and you don't want that. You want it to be just right. So what we're going to do is start cutting it right now, and I'm using aviational snips. I find that's one of the easier ways to do it. It can give you some problems though, because it is rawhide and it's tough to cut. Probably perfect for this. That should be it. What I'm going to do is wet it down first, both sides really good. Just rinse it off with water. I'm using warm water. I don't want it super hot, but I don't want it cold either. Just warm water. This is going to cause the rawhide to pick up a lot of water, moisture. But we're going to wash both sides down really good with soap and water. The front side is obviously the front side of the shield. You're not going to glue into that really, but I advise washing the whole thing with careful attention to the back side of the leather, not the smooth side. You'll be able to tell by the feel and by looking at it normally. We just want it nice and pliable, not super wet, but we want all the oils and dirt off. Using a towel just to dry it off. This is kind of the idea of wringing it out, make sure it's not soaking wet and dripping. But we don't want that much water. We mostly want the moisture in the rawhide, not on it. So, plus this further makes sure there's no debris, dirt, oil, or anything on it, because you're also scrubbing it, sort of wiping it down. This is the rough side here, and you can tell as you rub across it, you'll see that that would be the back side of your leather if you were dealing with leather, and people are familiar with leather. There's the smooth front side, and then you've got the inside of the leather. It would be towards the animal where it was skinned from, and that's the part we have here that we're going to be roughing up soon. with our copper scour consistency now, and you should be able to roll it up easily like I'm doing. It'll just unroll. It won't be hard like plastic like it normally is. But you want to make sure you have the right side before you scour it up. This is the smooth side, as I can see here. You can usually tell by the way it curls at the edge, it curls back. This is the side that needs to be roughed up, and we're going to use our copper scour. And the reason we're doing this is to make sure that the glue can adhere to the leather and hold it to the wood that's been sanded, or back in the day it would have been spoke shaved or planed until it was all the same. Here with our shield, and we have it finished out with the Indian ink, which is an old form of ink, which I did it in a calligraphy style using a reed, and our paints, which are made out of the same material we're using as the glue, our Casein glue, which are Casein paints, and also outline the letters in black Casein paint. So these should adhere to the Casein glue that I will be putting on, and then I will be putting the hide over the top, which I had washed and roughed up, and I washed it with soap to make sure that it would give a good bond. Let me make sure. And dry quickly, which is good. Try to redistribute what's too thin and too thick. It will become clear as it dries, and we're going to squeeze some of it out as we go. And it looks about right.
There you go. Glue's off.
Okay. Now that we know we got that pretty good, and this is all wiped off so there's no glue on top, what I'm going to do is, because I'm getting stains from my weights, I'm just going to go ahead and add this on top. So if I do this properly, I should be able to weight this on here good enough that it presses all the leather down to it like it should. So we're going to go ahead and put this weight in the very center. Should be able to breathe through the center, and we'll put a little more weight on it, but I'm going to go ahead and do stuff like this around the outer edges. I want a little more weight on it. This is our version of a shield press. We're using the weights that I have to try to press it down the best we can. Now, this plywood that I'm using should be able to bend and fold over and press down on it. So that's why I'm taking this. Put on the outer edges. I want like 4 of these on the outer edges, and I'm going to try to put weights in between. That'll give this a nice fold. It'll help press down on it. Put something like that out there. Another 10 in here. This should be more than enough. I think it's going to work. One of the curious things about medieval shields is you see spiral patterns on them, and you see cross-style patterns a lot, where it's in quadrants or a cross with different pieces. Now, some of this could be because of decoration or coloring, but Roland Vorzecke has shown that the spiral pattern a lot of times was on domed shields, and it could have been the way they stitched the leather, or possibly the way they pieced the shield together that caused them to want to stitch the leather that way to cause the dome shape. But on some flat shields we see the same design. So could it be stitched together? Well, this is going to be an experiment because we only have enough leather. We have more than enough leather to cover the shield, but we have to patch it together in pieces, which I decided to go with something simple, 4 pieces to make the back of the shield. Now, it could have been done on the front of the shield as well, but the reason we're using that pattern is because that's the only way to get a disc of 2 foot diameter done for a shield this size. If it was a 3-foot shield, I could see we probably wouldn't even have enough here. But possibly, if you could, use smaller strips or something and you had more pieces of leather, it wouldn't be one giant 3-foot disc, but you might be able to stitch them all together and get a 3-foot disc if you want to do a larger round. So what I'm doing is I'm going to draw these on here, and I'm going to give a 1 inch, well, or not 1 inch, but a 1/2 inch overlap for each of these panels, so we have a place to stitch them. And then it should be the same procedure. After they're stitched together good with sinew, then we're just going to go ahead and wash them and rough up the back side and make sure that they lay as flat as they can where the stitching seam's at, and then that will be glued to the back of the shield. What I've done here is where we have our little, about a 1/2 inch overlap. It's about a 1/2 inch. Each place we've done that, I've just overlapped it where we drew the line where it's supposed to be the right size. And I've used a tool that you use to put, one of Caddy's leatherworking tools, that you use to put holes for stitching in. And I've just gone along the outside and put stitches in this way, the holes, so we can stitch it together. So now we'll be stitching this together soon. All the pieces are ready to go. Much better. As this dries, the glue dries clear. It might have a little bit of a whiteness to it because the calcium and the calcium hydroxide, the type we used, I guarantee you if we would have used the pickling kind that's finer ground and stuff, it probably wouldn't have had the excess calcium. I think that is what's making it dry faster, but I think if this dries longer, because it's still quite wet, this is only 24 hours afterwards when we remove the piece of wood that we had over it and the weights. You don't have to have the piece of wood with the weights. I'm just doing that because these weights are a little bit rusty, and as you see, I already messed up once and stained my leather. I didn't want to do that. The rust stains are very difficult to get out. I don't even know if I'll be able to. But if this image doesn't show through well, what I'm going to wind up doing is using Casein paint and touching up the lines, and it will show through better here, the blue. I'll just leave that blue underneath it and touch up the lines, the red runes and the lines on top of the leather, and it should turn out really good. Get it lined up right, figure out where we want it. It's got to be where it lines up correctly, or close enough. And we'll start putting our glue on right now.
In this case, I stitched it.
Oh yeah, Caddy did a great job.
Actually, I think I was working on our leather working at the time, so I just threw it in with that.
I wonder if we need a little more water in this. We might need water, I don't know.
That's why you keep the little jar of water next to it.
Oh yeah, I can add water as we're going if I need, but I'm hoping I don't need it. The reason I say that is if it gets tacky, that's great. Yeah. And we want this back on here, lined up. And you should be able to move it around a little bit if you need to and so on, so we're doing good. Took me a minute to think on this. I'm going to do each panel with a weight, 25-pound weight. That way, hopefully, they'll all be as tight as they can in the center because it's kind of hard on these seams to get them just right. Might be even easier if you had some kind of box and cover them in gravel or something, if it was really like little river stones or something. Just poured it in the box, to compress it and then maybe put a larger weight on top of that. Might work good, who knows, if they were small stones. But right now the best we can do is try to push each of these panels down, or if you had a piece of wood for each panel, which I don't, those are going to be rounds that fit right up to the seam. It would be perfect if we had some square panels that we had cut for this or made for this, and we were making a set type of shield or something all the time with the panels this way. Probably work a lot better. But I still think this will be more than sufficient to try our new design out. Okay, what I've done is I've taken my rawhide, what I had left, the scraps, and I cut 2-inch wide strips, as long and as many as I could to make sure they go around the shield, but I want them as long as possible. So if you could get one really long strip that was 6 feet long and go all the way around the shield and just have one overlap by a couple inches and lace it together, more power to you. But I wasn't able to do that. I ended up with 3. I've wet them, washed them, and roughed them up, because not only I'm going to stitch these on with a method that Vegard Vike on Twitter, he's a conservator at the museum, that has the Gulk stitch shields in it. He has a diagram that shows how both sides of the rawhide are glued on like this with the Casein glue, and how the rimming is glued on and stitched as well. The reason I recommend gluing the rimming and stitching is if you were to get the shield cut into it and the sword sticks into it and the sword gets removed, the stitching will not come undone because it is glued. So what we have here is we have rawhide lacing, which I did around this shield in the same manner that he shows and describes. And I have boiled or bleached rawhide, which most people think that's dog bone material, but this is actually a piece of rawhide that I got that was like Native American style. Use that because it's harder. This one I'm going to be using the same material I covered the shield in, so it's a little more pliable and easier to work with. I'm going to be using ute twine or thread, and I'm going to be drilling holes just barely big enough for this to go through, and use a special leather needle to pull this through. This is used to stitch leather and make necklaces and stuff. You get it tan, it's really strong, you can pull as hard as you want. I've got a batch of glue made up, my glue right here. I also give a disclaimer, be very careful you're working with the high-graded lime. I've noticed since I've been working with it, I started wearing a mask when I mix it now, because if you breathe it, yeah, it's not really good. It smells hard, give you nightmares, you can feel it. So be careful with that powder when you're working with it. But right now I have this set up on board with an electric drill, small drill bit, and I'm going to start off by drilling at angles, as you see in the diagram, where it goes through, loops over, and goes through, so they're like angles in this manner all the way around it. So it's not using a lot of material, it's one strip all the way around. I mean, heck, you could use the wire, was one of my theories. If the Vikings could draw on wire, Scandinavians or whoever was doing it, you could lay some wire through there, and it would make it even harder to cut through the shield. And possibly you wouldn't need to glue it or anything, because the wire would cut and bend into the wood and seal itself. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to start off by overlapping about 2 inches on our seam and start there. And I'm doing the heaviest piece I've got across the top of the shield. And I press it against the wall as I go, so I can have it pulled tight and as far in as I can get it. You want to go back in as far as you can, where it goes through both pieces of leather and you can lace through them. And I'm going to drill a hole first before I put any glue or anything to start. And I think the secret on it is just drill as angled as you possibly can. And this is going to go clean through beautifully. I can see it here. It's going through. As long as the needle will make it through, we're good. I finished my lacing in and out of the shield at angles all the way through. There'll be a little stitch. Then if you looked at one side, each side is almost 2 inches apart, the stitches. On each side, you'll notice it's the same way because of the angle I went through with the drill. So that's a very unique thing about it, and one of the things is that helps the leather lay down like this. If you look, the leather is right against the shield. It was wet because what we did with the leather is we cut the strips, we washed it, and then we scuffed up the inside and scuffed up the edge of the shield. And when we wet the leather like we did the facing that we did in the back, then what happened is it was very flexible to work with. Then the laces went through with glue, and there's also glue underneath the rimming. So I guess you figured by now this is a laminated hide, glue, and wood construction. So basically you're laminating wood with rawhide, even the edging, and this stitches through the wood as well. So after we're done, and we've got it done, the side you want to be the flattest, which would be the front, because it's hard to weight the entire back down properly. You want it towards the ground. If you want to put a piece of plywood down or something really clean, you could, but it might be more likely to stick to it than with this floor. Make sure you've wiped off all excess glue. You may still have wet glue underneath your rimming. My glue dried very quickly because of the recipe I used with the calcium hydroxide or the hydrated lime. But what you're going to do is just go ahead and weight this down. After you have all the weights pretty much just balanced on the rimming, you don't want them on the actual shield board. There's no need for that. You're just pressing the rimming down, and it's pressed evenly against the floor for the front of your shield normally, where you want it to adhere the most, where it might come loose if something hit it. Leave it for 12 to 24 hours, hopefully, at least long enough for your glue to dry quite well. And hopefully the rawhide will snug up and fit tighter too, because it was wet as well and stretched on tightly as you stitched and pressed up against it. So it should get even tighter and tighter as the shield construction dries. But anyway, that's all you have to do. Just leave this on for a while and you should have a nice tight snug fit with your rimming. The rimming is really snug, tight, and fit around it, and glued and stitched. What I like to do on the very edge, which I could have tapered this more like I did the shield behind me to accept the edge, meaning how far you think the edge is. You start an extra taper on the shield when you're sanding or you're planing it down using your spoke shave or what have you, and you give an edge. You literally put an edge. I know it sounds like it'd be weak, but it's not. You make an edge around the shield. What I did is overhung the leather slightly. Like where I could, the leather's overhung and then kind of folded over so it forms its own little edge. And what I'm going to do to help tighten this up and give a better fold to the leather, because I don't want the rounded look, and I want it to fit down and tight, as snug as possible, I'm going to go around the whole shield and crimp the edging. Now after it's dried like this, it's still a bit moist. The whole shield is. It's going to take me a while to totally dry this out before we test it. We're going to have a nice pretty shield before then. But when we go to test it, we want it bone dry. And we've had thunder showers, storms, stuff like that. So we can't actually set it out in the sun and let it dry out properly. We will be doing that though and testing it in the next video. But I like to go around and crimp the edge. Now that sounds crazy, but this gives you this nice little fine edge, which also gives you a buffer if it gets hit to be cut into, and make sure it gets cut into properly so it'll help catch the weapon and stop it. But it also makes it even tighter. What you're doing is effectively crimping the leather, making it even tighter to the edge because it's pulling on it, and it just works out really well. I like the way that turns out, so I go around and crimp my edge afterwards. That's all I'm doing. I'll go around and crimp it till I'm happy with it. Well, we have our shield almost completed. We have our shield board totally laminated back and front with our rawhide and Casein glue, the rimming glued on and stitched on as well and pressed down. And we have our center boss ready to go. All I got to do is shape the handle, and we'll have this thing together and use the nails to put the handle on with. Problem is, our leather, when we first tried to glue the facing on, I had made the glue, I was really tired and I had been ill, you know, while we were trying to get the shield build done, so it's been taking longer than usual. I did a bad batch of glue. I don't know what I did. I'm assuming that I put too much of something or less of something, and it just wouldn't dry. No matter what I did, it didn't work right. Even my test batch to one side wasn't adhering properly, and I knew something was wrong. I immediately took the shield apart because I didn't want it rotting because it wasn't drying, and cleaned everything, because you can do that. The only flaw was, after I cleaned the leather, I noticed the leather had like a milky cast to it, and it didn't look as translucent as it normally does. Even when you rough it up, it still has a translucent look. Well, when I glued it on, you could still see the leather has this milky cast, and you can't see through it very well. So I'm blaming myself. Normally, like on Jarl Sprave's shield, you could see his image right here vividly when we sent it to him. Normally, it's very translucent, like where you can see every plank, just like on the back side. It turned out right on the back side. Also, our new glue with the lime, I usually don't use lime. I normally use baking soda. Is stronger, dries faster, so I highly recommend it, but it does have a slightly milky white cast, and I think it's due to the grind of the calcium hydroxide, the lime. If it was more pulverized or more sieved or something, or if I'd sieved it first and had time to do all that, I think it would have less little pieces of particles that show up and give it a white cast. So that might be affecting it too. But fortunately enough, this is known as parchment. And that's why Theophilus was talking about covering stuff with rawhides and stuff. It wasn't just to make good strong panels and doors, because that's what it says. You can make doors for altars and stuff like that, and you can also paint them. It's because it's parchment. And thin rawhide has always been used as parchment. You can draw on it easily with inks. You can paint on it. It usually doesn't run. This is fairly dry. And I'm just going to re-ink the whole thing and see how beautiful I can make it. And that's one of my theories too. If you had a background of all blue or whatever color, you could paint something lighter colored on top and have almost a 3D image with your Casein paints. So today what we're going to do is just try re-inking it, see if that brings it out vivid enough. A piece of red oak, and it is 3/4 inch by 2 inch by 2 foot. And what I'm going to do with it is I've drawn off how I want to cut this, and it's kind of like, think of doing a staff of wood and making it into a bow. We don't have to go for a complete bow and make sure that it draws and all that, but the idea is if it's shaped in that manner, it will balance the shield better. Plus, if it's tapered towards the ends, what ends up happening is when the shield does get hit and bends and moves, it kind of can move with it and less likely to break. And you want to use a good hardwood. I'd say anything you could use for a bow will work. I mean, a good hardwood that you would use to make an actual, like they'd use for archery, works great because it's kind of like a springboard, the actual disc. I've got the shape that I want to remove here, because if I were to sand this with my belt sander, it would take all day to get the proper shape. So I'm going to use my jigsaw and try to cut and remove this. It's the first time I've used a plank like this. I know other people do that. I normally use a round, like I've got a little bit lighter white oak round dowel, and I could use that, but I'm thinking I'll go with this today. The whole idea here is experimenting with new ideas. I might want to do some finishing shaping depending on the nails I'm using, because I have different length nails to get the little nail at the end. It shouldn't have a problem in these areas. It's just the right thickness. Not too heavy. It's a really light handle, but I think that should work fine on the back of the shield. And always use your shield to fit all this stuff too when you're doing it and working with it, so you don't make any mistakes, because the shields are never 100% symmetrical. So you can't just go the handles here, this points this. One of these is slightly longer than the other one compared to where it lines up on the shield. I did a slightly different shaped hole and so on. So it just depends. But it's going to work on here nicely. And I'll have a nice grip. And all we got to do now is get ready to put our rivets or nails through, which we're doing nails, bent over nails, traditional like we find on a lot of shields, and glue. After that, center boss, handle, attached, we'll have our shield complete. Now what I've done, I don't know if y'all can notice it or not from there, because I used pencil, because I want to be able to just wipe it off and see the markings, the 6 marks for the holes around the center boss, the umbo. I used this one, and yes, this is a commercial one, or I consider it that from a medieval shop. They mass produce them. It's a nice one. They make good ones. I used it in one of my older shields over here. It's up on the wall. But today I made my own center boss by hand, hammering it out like I showed you on dishing, and I just used this to figure out where the 6 locations are I need. There's other ways to figure that out. I just did that. It made it easy. I'm going to start off with a drill bit big enough that it will let my largest ship nail pass through, which I'm using these 2 larger nails because I don't have very many of them left from Andreas Knoll. I'm going to use that to hold the center boss and the handle, because it needs something really strong. You have to. There we go. Our nail's going to go clean through easily. Just got to drill our other hole. There we go. Nice. Center boss lined up on here. I'm trying to line it up as perfectly as I can this way. A lot of this is very hard to get just right. You got to keep flipping the shield and holding it tight against it. Make sure it's exactly how you want it. And the stick's going to line up and so on. So a lot of this is something I can't really explain other than just you working with it and trying your best if you're trying to build one of these yourself. I've got it marked on the inside of the shield where I can see where the holes are at. And I'm also going by the front because I know this is lined up perfectly with the grain. I do have the seams on the back slightly off, so it's easier to see the handle because of those overlapping seams. Flip it over and see how they went through and where they went through. And they went right through the seams like I expected. That's nice. That's going to help seal those seams up pretty nicely. What I'm doing now is I'm marking from the side because I can't do it directly straight over it easily. Marking on the side to see about where they're at. Then I'm going to lift it up, set it on top. Get some marks on the back side about where we need our holes. see if that lined up properly. If it did, this should slip right on and be where I wanted it. And it is. I would say we're doing pretty good. We're at the real crucial point, attaching the handle. Now the rest of the actual nails or holes that you put in for it can be drilled through. So we can drill through the front here, we can drill through the back here, and then put our nails through and bend them over. The first two is why I'm using 2 strong ship nails. The strongest ones I've got are to put this handle on, and the rest is going to be gravy from there. The first thing I'm going to do to make sure this is extra strong is I'm going to use my Casein glue or cheese glue, which I showed you how to make at the very beginning of the video, on the back of the handle. Now the reason we want to do this is going to help mount it and make it extremely strong. You might want to rough up the leather on the back side. I have stitching right there, so I'm just going to have to kind of rely on it and hope it does its thing like it's supposed to. I admit this glue works better in small quantities, but we don't have a very even surface due to that seam and the way it's overlapping on the back. So I'm going to try to put plenty, apply it liberally, and hope that if there's any problems it will kind of dry and seam it. Can't guarantee that, but it's better than not having the glue at this point. I gotta see if Caddy will get me a cloth to wipe the excess with. But that should be more than enough glue right there. I got that coming right up the back of the shield. Looks like it's gonna do kind of what I want it to do, hopefully. We want it right on here so we can press down. That may be a little bit more than what I wanted, to be honest. We don't know. What we're trying to do is get this to bend over and in, and we should be good, and it'll be on here strong and adhered properly. This up here, start bending the tip of our nail. And what that's for is to make it go back in the wood and clinch properly. Because when we find clenched nails historically, they're normally done in this manner for a very good reason. Linden skjoldr, completely finished, or a lind, and you can see each nail has been clinched over. The tip's been bent slightly, bent at a little angle, so a right angle, and then bent over into itself. So not only is it bent over on top of the anvil, but it also is driven back into itself. We did have a little problems with it trying to split at the tips, but what I did is I just rubbed glue in the little split. It's not going to make any difference. The rest of them did not split. I could have hammered them down even more, but I just wanted to make sure that it didn't split the handle. We did the same thing with smaller nails around the center boss. I may have to come back and actually put rivets here. I don't know, because it's a little closer to the hole than I expected. All in all, I still think it's extremely strong. I went back over the seams that Caddy had stitched for me on this back piece. The handle covers those nicely, and it's covered in glue. We had glue on the back, but I rubbed glue all the way into the seam, which hadn't been done yet, and pressed it back down and into the stitches. And anything else that I thought I needed to put a little glue on, just because I had excess glue after putting the handle on. But other than that, what we've done is we've basically put the handle on, one for each board, and there is exactly 8 boards in this one. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got your, since it's 6 spots around the center boss, we've got 4 nails here to help hold it to the shield. It is complete. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. and giving instructions on how to build such a shield as historically accurate as possible, or at least as much information as we have up to date. We tried some new things. We've got our 4 panels on the back where they're stitched together, and I believe that a lot of the depictions that we can't tell whether it's actually painted in 4 panels or it's some kind of seaming, or if it's some kind of metal. Some people assume metal. I think it was possibly just it stitched together because they were piecing different pieces of leather together to make larger shields and not having enough material to go around. That would very much make sense, and it could be done on the front of the shield too. This seems very strong. The linden wood seems like it has really good properties for a shield, and we plan on coming back and testing this real soon, and we're even going to try the new longbow I have coming in from Archie Bowman, and it's going to be 135 pounds at 32-inch draw, so it's going to be way more powerful than the bow we tried before. It'll be a lot more like what Jorg Sprave tried against the small shield I sent him that had his image on it showing through the rawhide right here. But anyway, I want to thank VKNG for such a wonderful ring. If you enjoyed this video, please go by and check their catalog out. I think you'll very much love their jewelry. Whether you want to order it or not, it's still some stuff to look at. It's beautiful. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I'd like to also thank Roland Vorzeka for his research and work on the shield. He's a good friend of mine, and he's talked to me about shields, and I've talked to him, and we've shared lots of information. I'd like to also thank Arthur von Eschen from Ausfolk Viking Martial Arts, which we tested a historically accurate shield that he built at Ausfolk Viking Martial Arts, and it was a lot of fun. I would also like to thank, most of all, Vegard Vike at Twitter, who is the conservator of the Museum of Oslo, Norway, and he's the one who takes...
The Cultural History Museum in Oslo. Yeah,
the Cultural History Museum in Oslo, and he's the one who has the Gokstad Gokstad ship shields, say it properly, and the Gromumbo helm, one of the only helms ever found during the Viking Age in Scandinavia that we know was a Viking helm. I'd like to thank him. He's the one who gave us a schematic for how the facings, the back and front of the shield, were glued on with Casein glue and stitched on in the manner that this is stitched, which I think is the most excellent way you could possibly rim a shield, in my own belief. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. We will be back soon with our testing, and it will be extreme testing like I normally do. It's going to be a lot of fun, and anyway, as always, farewell.
If you'd like to help support the channel, you can always sport a Thrand YouTube channel shirt that you can get over at viralstyle.com at the Thrand merchandise store. We have coffee mugs, koozies, a wide variety of shirts and hats. You can also help support us on Patreon, and if you do that, you'll also get exclusive content that can only be seen there.